It's electric.
And I'll teach you, teach you, teach you. I'll teach you the electric slide. Some say it's mystic.
It's electric.
Hey guys, what's going on? It is Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale with another pro tip episode. We're going to be sharing a Goblin Barrel Cycle deck. It's an anti-meta deck, it's an anti-giant deck, it's an anti-Goison deck, and we're really going to delve into it with some pro player tips from ElecTr1fy. So who is ElecTr1fy? Well, first of all, I think his profile pretty much speaks for itself here. Almost 70k challenge cards, almost 70k tournament cards. He won 3 tournaments in tournament week when tournaments were launched. That's 6,000 card tournaments. He's won 3,000 card tournaments, and he won first place 3 days in a row in my tournaments that I host every single day on Twitter. Follow me there at clash_with_ash. But anyway, guys, you can see this guy is certainly a pro, and he has a flawless, a stellar reputation in the community, so that's why I'm so happy to share his deck and his tips. He wrote literally a novel, it seems like to me, pages upon pages of advice all on this deck, so I want to get to the stuff. We're going to cover the type of stuff that we always cover in these episodes, and I think I'm getting a little bit better at the format, sharing the most important information, and adding little things that I think can help you guys out if you want to try this deck or any speedy cycle deck like this. So before I get to all those tips, guys, make sure you stay tuned to the end of this episode because I'm trying something a little bit different and I really want your feedback on this one. I actually had ElecTr1fy on the channel, so there's an interview with him after we watch a few of his replays. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to share all his tips, and then I'm going to bring him on for about 7 or 8 minutes towards the end of this video, and what he'll do is he'll critique one of my matches using this deck, and I think you guys found that very valuable when I did it with Surgical Goblin, so we're going to make that a staple of these pro tip episodes. So anyway, guys, let's get to this deck. So Goison is absolutely dominating the game. These giant poison decks are everywhere, and I'll tell you what, guys, the Mega Minion addition to the game has made these giant poison decks even more viable, strong, overpowered, whatever word you choose to use. They're definitely everywhere, and so many people are frustrated. But instead of being just frustrated about the deck, let's learn how to create an anti-meta deck, a counter deck, so to speak. So we're strictly going to be focusing on ElecTr1fy going against these Goison decks. We'll include one Lava Hound deck in there too, because Lava Hound decks, air-affected decks, have certainly risen in the game's popularity recently as well. So guys, finally, enough blabbing by yours truly. Let's get to this deck. So, first of all, a little disclaimer for you guys. This is a more difficult deck to master. This isn't a deck like Goison, and that's why maybe it's not as popular. One of the reasons why it's not as popular, but it's not as simple as dropping a tank, waiting, and then dropping a bunch of troops behind them. It's much more difficult. Once you get the grasp for it, you'll start to see that you're going to make leaps and bounds, but it does take a while to actually get the hang of a deck like this. You're making a lot of decisions in a very, very fast-paced nature because, you know, I mean, it's a very cheap deck, and you have an elixir collector, so you have a lot of decisions to make. And this deck is all about making solid value decisions. So let's kind of go over the general deck philosophy, then we'll move into the offense, the defense, common mistakes, and then we'll get to that player interview. So this deck is kind of a bait deck. It's a zap bait deck. That's why you have the Inferno Tower A and you have the Goblin Barrel B. So the Inferno Tower is able to really stave off that giant and bowler or whatever's coming your way as far as these big tanky units. And then offensively, your opponent's going to need to make that decision. Are they going to zap your Goblin Barrel or are they going to zap your Inferno Tower? So this deck is in a large way built around the synergy between the Inferno Tower and the Goblin Barrel. So beyond that, you have the Poison and you have the Log, right? So Poison and Log are really mainly defensive cards in this deck. Obviously, the Log can take out the Princess. It's #1 usage of the Log. And Poison, well, Poison just has a multitude of uses defensively and offensively, really. You can use it against pumps. In this deck, you'll have a lot of Elixir. It's a cycle deck with the pump again, so sometimes you'll just be sitting on a hand full of Elixir. You might not have a lot of offensive options, so you can go ahead and use that Poison on a pump in a tower, and that might be all the value you get out of it, but it keeps the deck cycling along. So Poison does have a very important use in this deck. So what is the utility of the Skeleton and the Ice Spirit, the two 1 Elixir units in this deck? It's very simple. Obviously, they can be great defensive weapons if you need them, but beyond that, the whole goal behind this deck is to build up a huge Elixir advantage throughout the match and cycle to your Goblin Barrel before your opponent can cycle to their Zap spell. That's why it's a Goblin Barrel Cycle deck. So the whole idea is you want to bait out the opponent's Zap, and then you want to cycle to your Goblin Barrel as quickly as possible. So let's go ahead and move on to the offensive combinations in this deck. The main offensive combination that would be the best case scenario for this deck would be a Mini P.E.K.K.A. followed by an Ice Spirit, followed by a Goblin Barrel. Now, there is some variety in terms of Goblin Barrel placement, but we'll get to that in just a bit. So sticking with offense for just a second here, ElecTr1fy said that it's very important to know when to execute your big offensive surges, and the #1 time you want to do that is when the opponent places a high Elixir cost tank or any high Elixir cost unit. So it could be like a Barbarian Hut if you happen to run against somebody who's using Barbarian Huts. They're kind of dead in the game, unfortunately. Well, maybe not in ladder play, but anyway, I digress. But the idea here is your opponent drops a pump and you have full Elixir. You want to go hard in the opposite lane or the lane that you're actually attacking. And if the opponent drops a Giant or a Tank or a Golem or a P.E.K.K.A. or whatever, you usually want to go opposite lane, especially if it's early in the match with that combination that we spoke of. The Mini P.E.K.K.A., the Ice Spirit, the Goblin Barrel. So those are your offensive, the best case scenario offensive weapons, and of course throughout the match, as you can see on your screen here, you're going to want to force your opponent to make those tough decisions with their Zap spell. So you have to remain aggressive with your Goblin Barrel. At the same time, you want to make sure you utilize your Inferno Tower. It's really the best defensive weapon in your entire deck. So you make your opponent decide, and then you capitalize on their mistakes or their misjudgments when they make them. So speaking of defense, obviously just said it, the Inferno Tower really awesome in this deck, especially because of the Goblin Barrel. Again, great synergy there. So the Inferno Tower really allows you to use that Goblin Barrel push we just talked about on offense, and the Inferno Tower will obviously buy you a lot of time defensively. So the Inferno Tower, you're leaning on it pretty hard, especially defensively, but with a deck like this, so cheap with the Elixir Pump, you can cycle to the Inferno Tower really quickly. Pretty much you can always have that Inferno Tower available. So Skeleton and Ice Spirit can be used on the DPS units in back of the tank. So imagine that you have, say, a Giant coming at you, and behind the Giant, let's say there's guards and a Musketeer, for example. You can use the Skeleton in the Ice Spirit on the guards and the Musketeer, and that's going to create an even more problematic situation for the attacker or for your opponent, because what they're going to do is now they're going to have 3 areas where they're going to want to use their Zap spell. They're going to want to use it on your Ice Spirit and Skeletons, hitting their DPS units, and they're going to want to use it, oh, by the way, love that ending there. Love that ending. I'm going to make that the intro for this episode, 100%. Anyway, you're making the opponent decide, right? Do they want to use the Zap spell on the Inferno Tower? Do they want to use it on your 1 Elixir cost units eating away their DPS? Or do they want to use it on your Goblin Barrel? Or do they want to sit on it? I don't know. It can be paralysis by analysis on your opponent's end. That's why the deck is so good. Alright, so enough about offense and defense. Let's get to the biggest mistakes that ElecTr1fy says that people make with this deck, because there are a lot of them. Again, I mentioned he kind of gave me a novel, which is absolutely awesome for a content creator like me, because it gives me more valuable information to sift through and share with you guys, like I'm doing right now. So, #1 mistake he sees with this deck is the Goblin Barrel positioning. You don't always want to play place the Goblin Barrel in the same exact spot, but he recommends switching it up in a certain specific way. He likes to start out his matches, as long as he's not playing in a bracket against the same exact opponent time after time. Obviously, it's kind of like rock, paper, scissors, right? You have to keep switching things up, but sometimes if you stay the same, that can win too. So what you want to do is start out the match and let your opponent think that you're always going to put the Goblin Barrel right smack dead on the center of the tower. And then towards the last half of the match, about a minute and a half left, or about a minute left, then you want to start switching things up a little bit. And you can see throughout all these replays, you can get a feel for how ElecTr1fy switches up his Goblin Barrel placement. In one of these matches, it actually got him the tower down by drawing out or baiting out the opponent's zap in the wrong spot. The Goblin stayed alive, and they totally just did 700 damage to that tower. So that is mistake number one. Make sure you start with one pattern, and then you'll switch it up in terms of the Goblin Barrel placement, about halfway or later into the match. Number two, don't throw it anywhere that's obvious that it's not going to a tower. So he sees some people throwing the Goblin Barrel maybe at an elixir pump that's right in the middle of the map, for example. You don't want to throw your Goblin Barrel somewhere that the opponent knows it's not heading towards a tower unless you're in a really, really tight pinch defensively. He said he very, very, very rarely uses the Goblin Barrel on defense, but sometimes you just have to. So don't use the Goblin Barrel on a non-tower situation unless it's a really, really fight or flight situation where you're going to lose a tower. So moving on, pumping. It seems like pumping is a common theme in terms of big mistakes or common mistakes on all these decks that I share with the pro tips. People need to pump a lot with this deck. ElecTr1fy says that if you're playing this deck and you're struggling with it or you're having issues, the number one reason, besides the ones I already mentioned, is that you're probably not pumping enough. So this deck is so cheap. It has the skeleton, it has the ice spirit, it affords you the luxury of cycling to the elixir pump on top of the Goblin Barrel a lot during the match. So this deck is all about getting a lot of pumps on the board and keeping the pressure on the opponent with all your cheap cards and, of course, all your zap baiting. ElecTr1fy says that some matches he'll have 4 pumps on the board, and he'll just keep putting the pressure on the opponent till they make a mistake, and then he makes them pay. And of course, if he makes a mistake, it's much easier to recover because he has the 4 pumps, he has the elixir advantage. You make a silly mistake, so what? You're going to recoup that elixir in about 3 seconds. So even if it's the last minute of the match, guys, when it gets into double elixir time, some people can tend to totally forget about their pumps. Go ahead and continue to pump if the match dictates so. Obviously, if you have one of their towers really low on HP, you don't have to pump. Or if there's only 10 seconds left in the match and you need something to happen, you're not going to go to overtime, you don't need to pump. But let's play smart, guys. If there's still like a minute on the clock and neither of the towers are low on health, then you want to continue pumping up even though the elixir's coming at you in double speed. So what else? Well, this is not a control deck. I feel like I should say that even though it might be kind of obvious to a lot of you guys, but you don't want to play this deck in a similar way that you play the minor control deck, for example, that we shared in the Surgical Goblin video, because that type of deck, you build the elixir advantage just like this deck, but that deck is much more like a chip deck. You only have the minor as your only proxy card, and let me tell you, having a Goblin Barrel versus a minor as a proxy allows you as the attacker, as the pusher, to be much more aggressive, especially considering what the complementary cards in each of the decks. Obviously, there's some minor decks that can be very, very strong and aggressive, but not the minor control deck. So this is not necessarily a control deck. This is a cycle deck. So cycle is different than control. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next common mistake that ElecTr1fy says a lot of Goblin Barrel players, especially using this deck, do or don't do, and that is diversify your push lane. So that means if your opponent's coming at you in a lane that you already have a lot of damage or a little bit of damage on that tower, you still, as a player in a cycle deck and a minor cycle deck, you have to be willing to hit the other tower before they mount that really big push, because that's when you're still going to lose against those Goblin, Bowler, Musketeer, Mega Minion, Prince decks. You have to be very careful. As soon as you see the opponent drop a Giant or a Musketeer, 2 telltale cards that they're going to mount a really big giant push, you have to hit the other lane. You absolutely have to hit it with the Goblin Barrel. As soon as you see that giant go down, throw the Goblin Barrel in the opposite lane if they have it. That's immediately going to take that, they're going to force them, to take either about 400 to 600 damage off their tower, or have to use their Zap spell, which is great because it allows you to then use the Inferno Tower on defense to their big giant push lane, or lastly, it's going to have to cause them to drop some troops in the other lane, thereby making their push that much easier to deal with on the other end. So you have to be willing to diversify your push lanes. It's kind of funny, actually, ElecTr1fy said that a lot of matches, he wins the match by doing just that. And what he does is he'll go, he'll drop a mini P.E.K.K.A. and Ice Spirit in the opposite lane, and then he'll go ahead and combo it with the Goblin Barrel in the lane that he has barely any damage done to that tower. And they'll go ahead and take down that tower. It's actually human instinct. It's natural human instinct to not defend as well against a tower that doesn't have a lot of damage on it. But when you have cards like Mini P.E.K.K.A., Ice Spirit, and Goblin Barrel, you can definitely take down the whole tower in one fell swoop, thereby evoking a wow from your opponent more often than not. So you can see throughout these replays, I think I shared, well, I don't think, I've shared 4 replays so far, 3 against the Giant decks, and especially the Giant Prince deck, and especially in the last week or two, the Giant Prince deck seems to be everywhere. It's not a new deck by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems like everybody's playing it now. I played a grand challenge actually just now before I recorded one of those replays we're just about to get to in a second as we welcome in ElecTr1fy, but I played 3 matches, and 2 of the 3 matches were the same exact deck, the opponent playing the Prince Mega Minion Giant Poison deck. So anyway, guys, let's go ahead and bring ElecTr1fy in without further ado. We'll go over this match that I recently played, and hopefully he'll tear me apart. I won the match, 1-0, but it probably wasn't pretty. I'll let you and ElecTr1fy decide. So here he is, guys. Alright guys, so as promised, I am joined right now by ElecTr1fy, or with ElecTr1fy, straight from Israel. How you doing, man?
I'm alright, man. What about you?
I'm doing very well, and very impressed with the first half of this episode where we reviewed this Goblin Barrel Cycle deck. Thanks so much for sharing it with us, man.
No problem, man.
So what I thought we'd do, what I thought we'd do here, and because it went really well on the last pro video I did with Surgical Goblin, and what I figured is maybe we can go ahead and watch a replay that I recently did with the deck that we just shared, and you can give me some pointers, some tips, and really just basically tear me apart and tell me what I could have done better. Sound good to you?
Alright, I got you. Sounds good.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and click watch right now. Feel free to go, like I said, just go ahead and tell me to pause or pick things apart as we go, whatever works best for you. But you can see my starting hand here was just all right. I decided to cycle to the elixir pump, and you can pretty much take it from here.
Yeah, I see. I think I'm a little late. Whatever. Okay.
It's okay. I paused for a second. Now we should be about the same. So,
all right.
My Ice Spirit just hit his tower.
All right, so I'm gonna forward. All right, so he dropped Giant in the back. He poisoned the pump.
Yeah, you like that move?
Yeah, so far so good. Cause like you had nothing better to do.
Exactly.
I usually don't like poisoning pumps because like it's not an efficient elixir trade. Yeah. One thing I see right now is like the Inferno placement. It's good because it lures the Giant, but the thing is, when it's backed out by minions or Musketeer, they don't target the Inferno Tower. So I don't really like it because this deck doesn't have too much to lure things or distract. So I like to have the Inferno to distract or tank the hits from Muskie or whatever.
Okay, so you would put the Inferno Tower more towards the left lane here, for example? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was and I noticed that
it could mitigate the damage the Muskie right now. Yeah.
I noticed one thing is that when you have one tower down, if it's like one tower down and one tower down, or vice versa, I noticed that you put the Inferno Tower right in front of your tower. Is that what you always do, or does it depend on the opponent's deck?
Most of the time that's what I do, because they can always drop Mini P.E.K.K.A. Right in the middle. So if I drop if I say I drop the Inferno over there, then they're probably gonna do that if they play well, and then it's done because I only have the Inferno to defend it. So that's why I do that.
I'm going to pause for just a second here. I'm at 60 seconds left in my match because I wanted to ask you if you can give me a little bit of feedback about my Goblin Barrel usage so far. It's been... I've been trying to mix up the location a little bit on the Goblin Barrel, but I don't think I'm comboing as well as I should be at this point.
Yeah, it's like I usually drop it the other lane. Like if he pushes the left lane, I'm gonna do it the right lane to not allow him to say drop the muskie, tank a few hits, and then go and counter push. So when you drop it the other lane, he's like if he uses zap, then his push is done, and if he uses muskie, he's practically wasting for elixir.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
If you were me right now, I'm going to press play again, but if you were me right now, would you shift gears to target the right tower because he's going hard at my left tower, or would you still...
When he's going hard, yeah, I do that.
Okay, so even though I have the 700 damage or 600 damage done to the left, you would switch towers?
Yeah, and then I would switch back. That depend, like... But yeah, I would switch back probably in time.
Oh, okay.
But like just to not allow him to counter push and have a big push coming, because you don't have much to distract. You need a poison to kill the big pushes.
So right now I have a little bit of a tower damage disadvantage. So
yeah.
I think that defensively I'm doing all right, besides the Inferno Tower placement. But one thing that I just clearly don't have a perfect handle on yet is the best opportune time to drop the Goblin Barrel, and obviously the best combinations to go along with it.
Yeah, so what I like to do, I like to have Ice Spirit and Skeletons in my hand, and when I have a Goblin Barrel, I like to throw it, and then use these two cards along with the mini P.E.K.K.A, maybe zap something, log something, and then I'm back to the Goblin Barrel so I can throw it right away. So it cycles very quickly. You need to take advantage of that because they can't. Most of decks can cycle as quickly.
Yeah.
So that's your advantage using this deck.
So you're basically getting Goblin Barrel as much as possible. You're cycling that Goblin Barrel as much.
And
as
I always count down the cards. Say he used zap, then I need to count 4 cards till he's back to zap again. So that's something I always do to make sure that I know when he has no zap and I can use the Goblin Barrel.
Oh, very interesting. That's a lot of work, man.
yeah.
That's next level.
It's not as hard as counting elixir.
Yeah.
But like once you get used to it, it's like counting 4 cards. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see, so I pulled off the win. It wasn't super pretty, but kind of, my first match with this exact deck, and I really like it. And again, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on at the end of this video and sharing your tips with us.
No problem.
Do you have any parting words or parting tips? I've already shared, obviously, all the information you've already given me, but anything that you think I could, or how about this? If you don't have the log, for example, is there any substitution for that legendary card that you would recommend? Maybe like Zap or something?
Probably Zap, but the thing is, log kills the princess, so that's something. But Zap also targets air, so it's a con. And I'd use Zap if I wouldn't have log.
Okay, so Zap for log if you don't have log, guys. And also, lastly, just out of curiosity, is there one type of deck in the current meta that you feel like this deck is weak against, or is it pretty well? It seems like an anti-meta deck in a lot of ways. It can counter a lot. It's very defensively strong.
Yeah. So the only thing I know if someone plays well is the bowler control deck. If someone plays it well, there's no way you can beat it, because bowler kills 2 goblins and swing, and then you take damage with 1 goblin every time. That's not gonna work. So
you talking about the one with the rocket?
No, there's the one heals and trainer Chris made. It's Inferno, Bowler, Zap, Poison, Ice Spirit cards.
Yeah, gotcha. So the super control version. Yeah, that can be tricky. I can see how that could be difficult, but.
And you can get creative with the placements of the Goblin Barrel. There are a few good placements I could show you them where it seems like it's going for the tower and then it's not, and you need to switch things up and then you're gonna get damage. That's
Well, that's awesome. The good news is that hopefully, if people want to, and I'm imagining they're going to want to, I'd love to have you on for a longer guest expert interview sometime in the future, and maybe you can go head to head with some of my other pro players that have recently been on the channel. That'd be really cool if you're willing to do that at some point.
That would be awesome.
Awesome, man. Well, congratulations on winning almost 4 in a row. You finished second in today's tournament. So close, man. It would have been the first time we've ever had that. But congratulations, and thanks so much for being so generous with your time. Great guy, and happy to have you come on, man.
Thank you very much.
No problem, man. Take care. All right, guys, so that is it. Another huge thanks to ElecTr1fy. What a good player, what a good sport, and what a great teacher. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode format with me sharing their tips and then them coming on and critiquing my match. Let me know in the comments below if this is the type of thing you want to see more of. And, guys, thanks for watching all the way till the end. Love you guys. Thank you so much. And, as always, take care, guys.